7 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Ask everyone to please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Kelly, would you call the roll, please?
Jim Dunlap.
Here.
James Shiloh.
Here.
Christian Koppel.
Here.
Michael DeVito.
Here.
Beth Marie Evans.
Here.
Alex Grados.
Here.
Eric Jones.
Present.
The quorum is present.
Were there any changes to the agenda as proposed? Is there a motion to adopt the agenda as proposed?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded. Roll call.
DeVito.
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Grados.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Shiloh.
Yes.
Koppel.
Yes.
Dunlap.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Is there a motion to approve the NIA consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Evans.
Yes.
Grados.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Shiloh.
Yes.
Koppel.
Yes.
DeVito.
Yes.
Dunlap.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Audience participation. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the board on any particular issue? Okay, we'll move on then. Communications, correspondence, informational items. Letters, newsletters. There were a series of LUDA newsletters included in our materials. I don't know if anybody had anything else to include. FOIA requests. Looked like you were busy with those.
There's more coming too,
Yeah. But they've all been answered? Any questions on the FOIA requests? Suspension report? Any comments or questions on the suspension report? Committee reports.
I have one for the Citizens Advisory Committee meeting. We had a really good meeting. There was what would happen I'm sorry, let me start again. On the snow days. That's what we first discussed. The reasons for the snow days, such as the icy roads and what would determine a snow day. And so that was brought forth. And then there was a little discussion about the strategic planning committee. And we had, let's see, there was 450 responses and 10% were students. So we had a pretty good amount of students that contributed. And then we talked about the Preschool for All grant, and I would refer to Steve, I can't remember the director's name, who did so much work to make that grant possible.
Neve Welp, she's our EC, Little Spartans coordinator or administrator.
Yeah, she did, I wanted to make sure everyone knew what she did. She did a lot of work to make that grant possible. And so now we do need to have a screening process, and there's a financial component, and there is certain things that we have to bring up to standard, or there's criteria we have to meet in order to have the grant. But I think that's a really good thing. And then we had a really good roundtable where it was brought up some discussion about grades. I guess one of the parents his daughter came home and told him that everyone gets an A. So he was a little concerned about that naturally. But then we were able to bring communication forth and had a really good discussion, and I felt like it ended really well because it was more that everyone has the opportunity to get an A. And so it was just a little communication issue. And this is where the students are able to retake tests in order to improve their grade, which is a good thing, as long as they're still doing the work and still learning. So we had a really good discussion, and I felt it was a really good meeting overall.
Planning and zoning met on the 8th. There were only 2 items on there. One was just a procedural approval of all the plats that had been replatted in the previous year, just a report on that. The other was a consideration for Randy Yock, who wants to take a parcel of land over off of Hathaway Drive, so behind Walgreens, along that stretch of road there.
Yeah. He's been there before, right?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe years ago. But wants to convert that from a C4, which is mixed use, to R3 multifamily to do a bunch of like 1,400 square foot townhomes in that area that would technically be fall under our high density requirements. But there were no real objections from anybody there to use that space, since it's pretty consistent with the other townhomes that are next to it. So.
And there's no age restriction on those, are they senior living?
It was not supposed to be targeted specifically at senior living.
Okay.
No, there was no age restriction. There were questions raised about whether those units were going to be direct sold, or whether they would be rentals. And I wouldn't say that he provided great clarification on that, other than the intent was to sell them, not to rent them out, but it would ultimately be up to the covenants, I mean the HOA that would take over once they're sold to decide, I guess, those rules and regs, if it's something that can't be imposed, I don't think, by the city. So this again wasn't an approval of that project, it was just an approval that if we ever reach approval on the project, then we would also approve the change in the zoning to allow that project to proceed. So, that's it.
Thank you. Other committee reports? Superintendent's report.
Good evening. I have several items here to go through for the board. A couple are a little bit more straightforward, but there are a couple that will be a little bit more, I think, intensive, time intensive. I'm going to stand up just to make it a little easier. The first one is 24-25 calendar. Just when we get the calendar approved, one of the things that we were waiting on was clarity on Election Day. It seemed pretty clear that Election Day was going to be a holiday in Illinois, but we had trouble just getting confirmation of that. So we kind of knew that it was coming, it was likely that it was coming, but until we got that clarification, I didn't want to add it in there. But that's the only change to the 24-25 calendar that I'd like to present. I've worked with SCA calendar representatives. They knew that this change was potentially coming, and we agreed on how to address it, which essentially is just to push all the days back one day to accommodate that through the end of the year. So that's the only change to the amended or the revised 24-25 calendar. Any questions for me?
Any extra day for snow days?
Just the 5 that we're required to have. And just while we're talking about snow days real quickly, today was our 4th emergency day. We'll add on 4 days at the end. So currently, students end the last Thursday in May, the 30th. Staff comes back for 1 day. Last year we had a picnic on that day. It's kind of a work day for staff. It's technically a teacher institute, but we give them time to wrap up the school year. We're planning a picnic again for that day. We did that last year. We're planning to do that again. Technically, that's right now, Friday, May 31st. So it'd be really nice if it just ended that way and we didn't have one more day, but the way this winter's going, you never know. But yeah, just those 5 emergency days. Any other questions on the 24-25 calendar amendment?
I guess just quickly, I know at quick glance, if you just looked at it, you're like, oh, we go till June 3rd, but that's just the way the calendar falls, and that's really, that's the only change.
Yeah.
We weren't in tune with this and looking at it all the time. It's just the way the dates fall this year, and that's why it's, in some years it's earlier, in some years it's later.
And, you know, over the years since I've done this and been in education, every 4 or 5 years, it seems like, that first day creeps up, and then all at once, you just kind of, it resets itself.
Yeah.
We try to align.
We'll start later.
Yeah, yep, start later, end later. We try to align with the IHSA calendar also, that's a huge consideration.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily have to do that, but it works out really well if we do that. So every couple of years, it just resets itself. So now, for the next couple of years, it'll start to creep up,
Yes.
and then 5 or 6 years from now, it'll get pushed back again. Yeah. Other than that, the calendar really is pretty much the same.
Does that state law about election day being a holiday, does that also apply to the primary in April?
It's not just a general, yeah, understanding.
Would you like approval on this?
We do need approval
Okay.
for the amended calendar, yeah.
Is there a motion to approve the amended calendar as presented?
So moved.
Second,
Moved and seconded, roll call.
Freitas,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Shiloh,
Yes.
Purple,
Yes.
DeVito,
Yes.
Evans,
yes.
Dunbar,
Yes.
motion carried.
Haven't quite posted the 24-25 calendar because we kind of knew this was coming, but now that this is done, I'll work with Lauren Holtz and communications to get it posted. The next one is board policy revisions. This is first reading. So the policy committee met on December 8th. Weren't quite ready to present these in December, but we are ready to present them this month. So ready to present those on first reading. Really defer to, there's not a whole lot in terms of updates in this one, but I prefer to Jim or to Michael, members of the policy committee, if you guys have any comments.
Yeah, as far as these updates go, most of them were housekeeping kind of issues, renaming or renumbering statutes, and changing different terms as statutes have sort of changed those terms. But other than that, they're really the only possibilities for change that we had. We didn't take. We just kept things the way they are. The biggest change was a change that a board could make to your library policy. But if you chose to go that route, then you risk the potential of losing your funding for your library. So we opted for the option that kept things the way they are, which keeps us funded by the state.
I have a question with regards to that. So I went in on press, and it looks like there's an alternative that the district could use, which states the practice of banning books or other materials with the district's library program is prohibited. Would that alternative still give us the flexibility or the option of receiving state funding without having to subscribe to the, the American Library Association's Bill of Rights, so that we can have a little more local control with regards to books, as opposed to just subscribing to what the Library Association recommends?
I'd have to go back and look at the policy, I don't have it in front of me.
Well, you can't answer that until there's litigation. And we chose the path of going down the road where we stay the same, where we know that it's been accepted in the past. And so that way we don't get tested by someone filing suit.
And I think this one is likely to come up again, banning books, kind of resurface as a hot topic.
Yep.
Probably isn't the last time we're gonna see policy or recommendations on how to proceed there, but typically with these things, I agree with Jim when it's controversial. I hate to be the district that sets case law. I'd rather that be set by somebody else and then we follow that. So I'd agree, that's one of the reasons why we kind of kept it status quo, see how this thing progresses in the future.
So it's more common to accept the Bill of Rights from the Library Association than to go off and just say, we won't ban books, but we're not going to accept the Bill of Rights. I guess
We know that works. without,
Okay. And we're unsure
Litigation.
about,
yeah,
if we
yeah,
just say,
the
make the
total ban thing, we don't know whether there'll be litigation or not.
okay,
And we don't want to be the sample case
gotcha,
in case
gotcha.
there is litigation.
That answer your question?
Yep.
Any other questions?
That was a good question.
Thanks.
This is first reading, and typically boards had 2 opportunities to see policy revisions. So we talk about it tonight, and then we'll bring them back in February for second reading. If they're approved, then they become policy. Okay, next 2 are a little bit more in depth. So I'll take a little bit more time here. For a long time, we've talked about the high school as a facility. You all know, not only veteran board members, but even those of you newer to the board, high school needs some work. We've invested in our facilities over the last several years, but the high school is the largest facility, one of the older facilities, and it's going to need some work coming up. The original portion of the high school was built in '61. We have additions to the high school in '67, '77, '98, 2003, 2013. I double checked that with Mr. Ekstrom, who I'm glad is here tonight. The current facility serves our students well, but it needs some required maintenance, also some recommended maintenance. We'll talk about figures here in just a second. We've considered those over the last couple of years, but one of the things that I've really thought long and hard about is not just updating an aging facility, but is there a way to position the school district to not only make sure that that facility is maintained and is up to snuff, but to envision what that high school looks like moving into the future. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight. Problem is, as you guys know, is that the debt limit for the school district, we're not there, but we're pretty close. The district is carrying a lot of debt right now, and that limits what we're able to really consider doing with respect not just to the high school, but to all of our facilities. I'm going to focus on the high school tonight because it's the largest, it's in the need of most work. We've talked about the current state as well as the future of the high school. I'm going to talk about some things tonight that we've discussed already, but also some conversation that we've had within the district. I'm purposely not going to go into the detail of everything that needs to be done. If there are questions about that, I'm glad to answer that. We've hashed some of that out in the past, but that list is so long and so detailed, didn't really want to get into that. I'm just going to talk about overall figures. If you guys can see this very well, I'm going to even use the pointer tonight. So there's a copy of this in the slide deck. You'll have a chance to look at it up close. If you'd like a copy of this image, I'd be glad to send it to you. The original portion of the high school was built in 1961. It's really everything that faces to the east, as well as this piece here on the west side of the building. There are additions in '67, the gym and some of the classrooms around there, as well as shop area on the west side of the building. Additions in '77 in a couple of different locations, '98 and in 2003, and then 2013. Just to pause briefly, and I'm not asking the board to make any decisions tonight. Just want to have some conversation about the high school. We've talked, some of us as well as internally, about the future of the high school. Should we be looking at maybe relocating or building a new high school at some point down the road? That point would probably be on my time with the district, just because of the debt that we're carrying currently. But we've had that conversation, and part of my job would be to work with the board to position the board in the future, as well as the administration in the future, to make that kind of decision. One of the things that I've really kind of struggled with is, yeah, you could move to a different location. It would be very expensive. We'd have to buy property. That's going to increase the cost a little bit. But one of the things that the current high school has is a lot of existing infrastructure. And while this part of the building was built in '61, now we're coming up on over 60 years. Other portions, 67, 77. Other parts are newer. Field house, built in 2003. Could probably use some work and will need some work in the future. But that's a really unique facility that not a lot of other high schools have. Is there a way to hold on to that? Is there a way to hold on to the existing football field? I will tell you, having spent a lot of time working on athletic fields and some of the challenges that come with them, our high school field itself, as well as the stands that have been upgraded, and the press box are in great shape, can serve the district for a long time moving forward. As well as some of the parking that exists. Tennis courts are going to need a little bit of work in the future. That's another conversation. But we also have all this green space behind the building. So there's a lot of existing infrastructure that the district can tap into if we keep the high school on this site. And again, we're not talking about making any decisions tonight, just kind of spitballing a little bit. We did, just so you guys know, involve the architects, FG&M architects in the conversation. They threw out some ideas and kind of acted as check and balance to some of the conversations that we were having, but they have been involved in the conversation. One of the things I didn't include here, should have zoomed out just a little bit. You guys all know that Salem Lutheran Church, I think I have that right, is located about right here. There are some commercial buildings over here, but there's green space there between the church and those commercial spaces. So while the district doesn't own that currently, one of the things that's kind of played into my thought process and part of our conversations is at some point in the future, would it behoove the district to pursue that property and add it on to the high school? So I mentioned FG&M are architects. They have a great working knowledge of the high school, experience working on high school projects. So they have some figures already previously that they've presented to the board, but we asked them during our conversation for more current figures. So the required work currently is about $346,000. Those are 2023 costs, so not 24 or 25 costs, but 23 costs. Would likely go up a little bit, depending on how far out in the future the work would take place. Recommended work is about almost $16 million. Other improvements would be $27 million. That total alone comes up to about $43 million, but that does not include maybe other enhancements that we'd like to make, as well as other work that needs to be done within the district over the next 5 to 10 years. The high school, again, is not the only facility that's going to need work. There are other facilities to take into account.
Do those figures, does the improvement figure include the recommended work figure, or is it a separate figure?
It's a separate figure, yeah. Good question. $43 million is a big number. And at the end of the day, that's probably not all of the money that we would need to spend on the high school in its current state, as well as other work that needs to be done. So again, the problem that I've wrestled with over the last couple of years is how you pay for all of that. Because our school district's at its debt limit, or not at, but close to it, there's limited room to take on additional debt. Now, some of you were part of a conversation that we had with PMA within the last year or so. They made a presentation, and there is room to take on additional debt, but that really starts to put us at our max. And one of the things that worries me about that is that if we ever get into an emergency kind of situation where we need to borrow additional dollars because of work that needs to be done at any of the other facilities, it really ties our hands. There's some room to do some work, but I'm really cautious about pushing the district to its maximum debt limit. We've got the ability to borrow about $12 million. That would allow us to do some significant work, but keep in mind, one of the things that I, again, wrestled with is that the high school is already aging, 61, 67, 77. You get into the 90s and the 2000s, a different story, but when you're in the middle, 1961 to the end of the 1900s, you really start to put some age on the facility. One of the opportunities for revenue would be the county school facility sales tax. I know the district has considered that in the past. There are some challenges with that, but one way to generate some additional revenue that we don't have right now is the 1% sales tax. 1% sales tax. There was a presentation done by Stiefel Nichols at an IASBO meeting, but they repeated that presentation at a superintendent's meeting in King County and presented some figures to all of the school districts that were there. They estimated, and in the end, if the district moved in this direction, one of the things that we need to do is a feasibility study on what we would actually generate. But they estimated an additional $2.5 million in revenue that's primarily, almost all, for facilities only. There are one or two exceptions. One of those is paying for school resource officers, which we have already and is part of the budget. But by and large, that money is only set aside for facilities. Not paying for facility staff, but just paying for facilities. New add-ons, renovations, those sorts of things. We do have a modest budget of approximately $350,000, and that sounds like a lot of money, but we go through it pretty quick. Because it's not just the high school, it's the high school as well as all of the other facilities in the school district. One other alternative, not the only other alternative, but one is to kind of continue to take a wait-and-see approach. Piece together what we can at the high school, meet our life safety requirements in terms of the required work that needs to be done, get that recommended work scheduled out into the future. But again, we have to wrestle with this, the debt that the district has, as well as debt that the district needs to consider in the future. Tonight played out really well. One of my recommendations is that I would recommend that the board just have some time to consider whether or not the board wants to pursue a conversation about the 1% sales tax. We've had some conversation before. One of the things that's transpired that is not part of the presentation is that some of the other school districts in DeKalb County have had expressed some desire just to have a conversation. No commitment, just as a desire to have a conversation about possibly pursuing that 1% sales tax. For several years, that had to go to the county board to get approved to go on the ballot. It doesn't necessarily need to happen that way anymore. The majority of school districts in a county, and there are a lot of school districts that have land in DeKalb County, but the school districts whose home office, so to speak, is in DeKalb County, a majority of those can decide to put it on the ballot themselves. They don't have to have county approval anymore. So things like that have changed, but there is some conversation already starting amongst other school districts in DeKalb County about whether or not to pursue that. So while that's one thing that I would have recommended that the district consider anyway, there is some interest amongst other districts in the county, at least of just having that conversation. One of the things that also appeals to me about that 1% sales tax is that it not only generates a little bit of additional revenue to do some of this facility work, it buys us time. It buys us time to pay off existing debt and get to 2036 and 2039. We have large amounts of debt coming off in 2036, and we have another large amount coming off in 2039. Pursuing the 1% sales tax and generating $2.5 million a year allows us to do work every year, but it also allows us to borrow some money with that sales tax revenue as the source to pay off those bonds. Allows us to buy time to get to 2036, then to get to 2039, and position the district to have a much different conversation, I think, about the high school as well as facilities in general. One of the other key points, you get to 2036 and you get to 2039 and you pay off debt, it positions the district to borrow funds that the district needs to do that work at the high school without increasing property taxes. So as debt rolls off, debt could be issued that takes the place of that, so residents don't see necessarily an increase in their property tax bill. You miss the opportunity to bring property taxes down, and as a property owner in the district, I love that idea. But many of us know, maybe all of us know, that if that tax rate comes down, trying to get it back up is a whole other challenge. So that's just something that the board, I think, needs to consider as we kind of plan for the future. If we can get to 2036 and we get to 2039, additional debt could be taken to pay for renovations or additions to the high school. If we do that, it gives us time also to really take our time and envision what we would like the high school to look like, what we'd like it to function like in the future, and think far beyond all of our time probably on the board or in administration. Like I said, this was meant only to be a conversation, to give you guys some things to think about. We'll come back to this in February, just have some additional conversation. But I would be open to questions and maybe some discussion amongst the board. Any questions or comments for me?
You mentioned doing the work on the safety aspects of the high school, and I'm just wondering, is it possible to do smaller things like that? I think when we went to the first meeting, it was a special meeting when Alex and I first got on the board, and they talked about just doing something regarding the plumbing, I think it was. That was a major issue at the time. I'm sorry, I forget the gentleman who used to be on the board and he was a contractor or knew a lot of.
Steve Nelson, yeah.
Yeah, he knew a lot about the building.
Yeah.
But anyway, is it possible to close off areas of the high school and get smaller things done and while still using the building? I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. Oh, go ahead.
So I've worked with architects and contractors over the years a little bit. Mark and Nicole have worked with our architects quite much longer here than I have. It's amazing how creative they can get when it comes to phasing some of that work. We really need to work with high school administration, depending on where that work needs to be done. How can we section off those areas of the building? But it also depends on the work that needs to be done in those sections of the building. Are those projects that we can afford given the current budget? But projects like replacing piping, plumbing can be pretty expensive and pretty extensive. So we may be able to section off portions of the building and kind of do that work over a phased period of time. I don't know that we're in a position right now, unless we were to pursue some of that $12 million borrowing additional funds to do some of that work. But I think there's other work that's equally or close to being as important. So again, that's kind of one of the things that I've wrestled with is how would you kind of pick and choose what work? And the required work that's about $350,000, $346,000, that's absolute bare minimum that needs to be done. Then you get into the recommended work, and it gets into some of that plumbing and some of those other projects. But architects have been pretty creative in terms of working with the school district on how to section off parts of the building and to do the work. I think there was some of that sectioning off in this building when work was done several years ago. So that's a possibility, yeah.
Could this CSFST money be used to pay down principal on existing bonds that were used to for construction purposes? So that we could get that done maybe even sooner than FY, is it 26, 29?
It could be. In fact, I've seen districts use that 1% portions of that 1% sales tax revenue to abate taxes. So you still put that on the tax levy.
Mm-hmm.
The debt that you have to pay off, you're required to do that.
Yeah.
But then you can use that 1% money to abate some of those taxes. So it can be used for that. And I think if the district decides to pursue that, and let's take one step further, if all of the districts decide to pursue that in DeKalb County and the voters approve it, it's a referendum, so the voters have to approve it, then one of the conversations that we would need to be having internally and then recommend to the board, and the board would need to have a conversation about is where's that kind of balance between how much money are we using to do some of the work that needs to be done, and how much could existing debt be abated and paid off.
I guess maybe I phrased it wrong, or maybe I'm not understanding something. Could we pay down that debt, like pay in a, like if you're, for example, if we're thinking of this like a mortgage, make an additional lump sum payment of $2.5 million per year to just get the current debt outstanding reduced quicker than the current timeline?
I don't know how much of our debt off the top of my head, I don't know how much of it is callable that we could pay off early. Some of it is structured in a way that you can't pay it off early. In fact, I think most of it is structured in a way that we can't
I
pay it
thought
off
most of
early.
it was called.
But even if we could, then we wouldn't have the money to do the projects.
Yeah.
So I'd just
I
be
think
buying more time, that's
To
all I
answer
was saying.
to your question, could we? I don't even know that we could if we wanted to. But second of all, I think the biggest reason to pursue that is to just be doing some of this facility work in the meantime. I think one of the things to consider is how to sell that to the community if the board and the districts and the county decide to pursue it. Paying down debt and especially evading taxes is really appealing, but I think we really need to be able to explain to voters why that money is important. So I think there will be an expectation to maybe abate some taxes, but also use that money to actually do that work. So I think there's a balance
Gotcha.
there, but I think we need to get over that first step first to have that conversation.
But our neighbors to the south that don't seem to be having, a revenue problem with all the new development along the 88 corridor, they could just take their percentage of this and abate property taxes and just shift their revenue source.
Good.
Because that was already an issue that board discussed is, well, the residents came up, our rate's too high, so that could make it appealing to DeKalb. And
Good.
they seem to be the deciding factor because they're more than half of the county.
So
anyway.
certainly, I think DeKalb would have the largest impact on that outcome. But Sycamore is the next largest community in the county, and I think both of the two communities together really, I think it's going to come down to DeKalb and Sycamore, primarily DeKalb, but DeKalb and Sycamore together, if that decision is made to pursue 1% sales tax.
And that kind of leads me to my final question. How's this money generated? Because I believe the 1.5% tax is levied by the county. How do they portion it out to each district within the county?
So typically what happens is that 1% is added to sales tax throughout the county on a lot of items, but not every item. So for example, agriculture is one of the industries that is kind of exempt from the 1%. Not every aspect of agriculture, but a large portion of agriculture is exempt from 1%. Groceries are exempt from the 1% addition, but eating out is not. If you go out to Tom and Jerry's, there's going to be 1% additional sales tax. All of that's collected by the Department of Revenue. They send it back to the county, typically to the Regional Office of Education, who takes that money and then distributes it to each school district in the county based on students enrolled in your district who live in DeKalb County.
Okay.
So one of the things that I also need to share about that is that we have some students that live in Kane County. So that portion of our enrollment doesn't count when it comes to that 1% sales tax. And that was factored into that estimate that was given earlier. It's only our students who live in DeKalb County. Every district who has a student that lives in DeKalb County would get money. So if you have one student that lives in DeKalb County, and I know that there are a couple districts that just have a sliver, if you have one student, you're going to get some money. But for us, we're a good example. We exist in both DeKalb and Kane County. It's only our DeKalb County students enrolled in Sycamore schools that would count towards that calculation.
And it's divided by the students then, so the population of the
Correct. Based on
municipality.
that money,
district.
that money follows students.
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
Are the students that are in Kane County just on the other side of County Line Road? How does that work?
They're included in our enrollment, but they're not included in the calculation and the disbursement of that 1%, that county school facility sales tax money. And that's, so every year, the regional office typically does those disbursements. Every year, they collect enrollment figures for each of the schools that have students in DeKalb County. They collect that, and then they kind of portion out where that money goes. It's a pretty transparent process. Typically, the ROE also keeps an administrative fee to process all of that, but by and large, that money then goes out to students, school districts.
Our Kane County population is pretty small though, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
a little bit of Maple Park, I think, but most of that's Caneland, so.
Yeah.
Doesn't look like we have probably about 12.5 million or so in principal to be called by next February. But I don't know how those interest rates compare to what would be issued
I guess that was my other question. Well, I
Might
think,
not be attractive to
you know,
do so.
because you guys strategically restructured in 20, right, when rates were low?
Right.
Or, so we
Well, we could.
probably wouldn't.
My question's more about the numbers up there. I know we've had several meetings since FGM did their original facility study in 2020, 2021?
It was,
2019? Before all that?
right before I started.
And I feel like the last time we talked about financing numbers for the high school, that we were looking at a number closer to 70 million. So what's different, I guess, between that number and this 40 some?
Yeah, that includes, and Mark, help me out if I'm incorrect, that includes 2035 and beyond. These numbers are just going through 2034.
Okay.
And then 2035 and beyond is that extra money. This also doesn't include instructional spaces. Looking at that and reimagining instructional spaces with that other thing. That was what, another
That's correct.
20 million, maybe more than that.
I know it's not terribly important to the specific conversation. I'm just trying to wrap my head around
Well,
it.
I think it brings up a really good point. So there's a reason that I didn't include that. So we talked about a couple of different options. Again, just kind of spitballing with our architects. Based on what the facility looks like now, would we keep the existing structure and just renovate it? There is room for one more addition. There's one more potential planned addition on the west side of the building. So that was part of the original plan of the high school. There is still the opportunity to do that. This is purely my idea. It's not Mark or Nicole, so,
Or the architect.
but this building, this part is 1961, this is 67, this is 67 also, but it's a unique part of the building because it's got the gym in it. There's some classroom spaces, but it's unique because it's got the gym. A lot of the newer parts are over here on this north side of the building. So one of Steve's ideas, and we had a conversation with the architects about this, is instead of, I haven't seen a bug in a long time. Summer.
Where did this come from?
It's kind of a nice side, actually, not really. So this is the front of the building right now. You come off of Spartan Trail, there's parking out here. It's a great entrance to the school. The other reason I brought up this green space over here is that if we decided to pursue that green space, there is a portion of that older part of the building that could be demolished and retain some of this newer portion, these newer portions over here. I know that the 67 portion isn't, but again, it's the gym. I think that's unique. You never want to give up gym space. That's a space that I would want to renovate. But you could change the look of the high school by doing an addition on the west side here, and then making this, the front of the building somewhere over here. Come off of DeKalb Avenue, as opposed to down Spartan Trail. You don't necessarily it's not that you necessarily don't need Spartan Trail under that kind of idea. But part of the reason I didn't include some of the additional enhancements is that one of the things, and this is kind of the envisioning part of, I think, the discussion is, we don't just have to renovate the existing space or proceed with the addition that was originally planned. If we can get to a point where we can really have a conversation about what the district can afford, if that makes sense. You could leave it just the way that it is and renovate existing space. I think there's parts of the structure that are still in really good shape. At the same time, for the community to get behind an expensive renovation, they love to see something new on the outside. We know we need the pipes and the electrical, the wiring and the mechanical systems, but nobody sees that. One of the ways to get the community behind a renovation and support it financially is give them something different to look at, something new to look at. So I didn't include all of that because if we ever get to the point where the district has that conversation and you're actually demolishing part of the old building to replace it with something new or give it a different look, you're not enhancing classroom spaces, you're replacing them, and that's part of the construction cost. So I think that's a really good question, but there's a reason that I left it out of my presentation.
I guess what are the improvements then? Is that not what you just described? Is that something else?
I would call those, I would say that's new, maybe, not really new construction, because you're adding on to an existing structure, but you're adding on new space. So, again, just to kind of talk about Steve's idea, not our architect or Nicola or Mark necessarily, but if the front of the building were somewhere around right here, with an addition over here for the classroom space that you're losing, you have a whole new facade potentially to look at, and you have new classroom space over here. So the enhancement shows up in new space that we don't have right now.
But that's not included in that $26 million figure.
Correct. That's
Okay.
How much of that 1961 space is education? I mean, I know there's a lot of offices, but, the administrative stuff is all at that end, and cafeteria and stuff like that.
Administration is here, but it's on the first floor, so this entire second floor, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, the entire second floor is instructional. This hallway, most of that is instructional. It's music, it's the auditorium, kitchen space is down there, library is here in the 77 portion. This portion is the yellow hallway, so that's all instructional space right there. Cafeteria is down in this area. Part of the cafeteria is 61 and part of it is 98, right?
Correct.
Just looking at this, I think, first, I like Steve's idea in the sense that I think a facade would make sense in terms of like, if you're gonna pitch to the public and if there are the means to do it. But I think another piece that, as a comment, less a question, the fact that over the last 60 years, additions have been made, I think that's in a lot of ways, the roadmap to the future too. I think that within the means of the district, I think we're gonna see just through necessity, new additions, but less, and I'm less inclined to want to renovate old space. I just don't know that that's money well spent. I think another piece of context that's helpful is utilization of the high school itself. So again, thinking about a high school in 2037 and how space is used in terms of in person versus already the fact that we have a lot of classes offered hybrid, including the partnership with with Kishwaukee and in terms of other out-of-school opportunities. I have in mind to wonder, if a build-out is going to be as needed in 2037, or if we find ourselves using less space. Last piece to this is the fact that over the last 10 years, our student population has maintained, it's been completely almost flat, almost decreased. So I certainly don't know that if we can be more efficient with utilization of space, I think that could be another option as the tax base grows. If there's a way where that tax base, since the tax base is apparently outpacing population of students, while inflation is keeping it at bay, I think there's an opportunity for those two lines to intersect and eventually we go, okay, we can put on an expansion with a really, really tight utilization, given the fact that we don't have the growth in the student population. So just that, my general opinion of what I think is going to happen is that, and I like the idea of additions. I'm less inclined to support renovating older spaces. And then as far as the sales tax goes, I think we'd have nothing to lose letting the community weigh in and other districts convene and then weigh in and vote. So I don't know, it just seems like there's no risk in that. So.
I think if we're going to support it or if we're going to pitch it, we'll discuss it. Let's discuss it first, obviously. But if we're going to even consider supporting it and saying this is what we'd like to do, I'd like to have some sort of plan in place that we can maybe advertise to the public. And listen, this is why we're doing this. This is the purpose of it, and be able to show them what the plan is for the future of any facilities that we have and the updates we're intending to do. I don't know if we prepare reports or just little blurbs that we can put out. I know we have communications people that we can put out stuff on social media, but something tangible that people can see, kind of relate to.
I think that's a great idea. Vision 2035 or whatever. This is what we'd like to have for the community.
I know it'll change.
Or whatever, yeah.
Well, I think not to interrupt you, but I think that's the opportunity here. You know, for a long time, we've been talking about what do we have to do to high school? What do we have to do to high school? You know, what's required, you know, what's even strongly recommended. This whole time I've kind of wrestled with how can we get to, can it just have to be, what do we have to do? Can we get to a point where we can actually have a conversation about, we have to do this now, but we can have a conversation about what this looks like in the future. And truly, this is the hard part, right, is if that conversation happens now and that decision happens now, it's not until 2035. Now, I benefited in a previous position from a board and an administration who had that kind of forethought, made those decisions, and then positioned the district 12 years later to be able to have a conversation that they couldn't have at the time. So the hard part for us is that we may never be part of that. It's about setting the district up for that, and that needs to be part of, I think, the message. And very likely that if the board decides to engage in that conversation and the districts in the area decide to pursue that, that probably isn't going to happen until March of 25, the election in the spring of 25. So it does give us time. Could do it in November, it'd be a little bit of a rush. I'm not sure that putting this on the ballot during a general election is a good idea, but there's, you know, different opinions on that. But we would have time, and I think, Christian, your point is really good. We need to be able to talk about why this matters, how it enables the district to have not just this conversation with the high school, but potentially other conversations with other buildings and the school district in general. Gives us time to plan for that, and not just Sycamore, right? You know, that vote happens throughout the county. So part of that strategy is also engaging with DeKalb and Salmonaught and Sandwich and other districts in the county. But I think that's a really important piece. It's not just about having the conversation, deciding to do it, but how we put together a plan and kind of a campaign to inform voters in terms of what that could mean. Remember, that's a referendum. You can't go out and tell people to vote yes, but you can go out and tell them what it could mean and what it would enable the district.
I guess for me, something really appealing about the sales tax is it gives, you know, one opportunity for the district to have a source of local funding that is not property taxes. I mean, if you look at the way the city of Sycamore is funded, people don't, at least in my experience, complain about their taxes to the city of Sycamore, but they have a plethora of other income streams that aren't property taxes, so that on their tax bill, the portion that goes to the city is much less than the district, because we're sort of pigeonholed in this one funding option. Whereas I think we present this as, look, we have an option or an opportunity to generate some revenue besides the value of your home that isn't necessarily what you paid for your home. It's in some cases an arbitrary number that in itself would be a sales pitch that I think the public would entertain.
I think that's a really good point, and I think it's important for everybody to remember that if we enter into a conversation and we decide to pursue it, everybody who lives in DeKalb County is still going to pay a portion of that. But you know, opportunities like Pumpkin Fest and Corn Festival in DeKalb, where a lot of people come from outside of DeKalb County and spend a lot of money, those are kind of opportunities where you know, people who come and visit here are helping to fund that. There will certainly be a portion that's on the shoulders and backs of residents of DeKalb County. It's not through property tax, but there will be opportunities to share that with people who come here, and just another reason to generate interest and interest for people to come to DeKalb County.
Well, for or against the sales tax, I think regardless, putting it before the public as an option, you know, if you endorse the sales tax, this speeds up the timetable, you know, or it allows us to do these improvements in this capacity. Whereas if you said no to the sales tax, then it means that, you know, you're going to have to access debt, and it's going to be access to it. Like, so there isn't a scenario where you're not going to have these needs. It's just a matter of how you're going to access money for the needs. And I think as long as, you know, as a board, we present the information in such a way where an informed voter can go, okay, I want the district to access money, you know, option A or option B, I think we've done our due diligence as a board. And if that means that it passes, great. If it means that it fails, great. But regardless, then the community has chosen how they want the district to proceed. So, but to me, that's how I think the narrative should be presented.
I think the more we can present this to the community as a choice, here are the options. Here's something that the district is facing. We're doing our best with what we have, but this is the issue. It's the high school. It's facility planning for the future. We know we have this responsibility. Here are some options. Which is most appealing to you? You know, selling it that way, as opposed to this is the one. This is the only thing that we need to do. I think if people feel like they're painted into a corner, they're less likely to consider it. If we can sell it as kind of a here are your options. You know, we're really seeking feedback on this the best that we can. Not going to work perfect, but I think if we can put it out that way, we've got a better shot at getting people at least just to listen and engage, but then they get to vote and do the.
They own the outcome. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really it.
Yeah.
So like, I guess in terms of the next steps, you would talk about like, hey, there's these conversations that are potentially going to happen or something like that. Like, in terms of that direction, do we need to wait until the end of February, or I mean, like, all we're saying is, hey, if there's conversations happening, can we be included? Like, is anybody opposed to that? Like, it seems like no brainer.
So one of the dangers of doing these, getting these slide decks ready in advance, is that conversation happened after I got this ready and did it. So I didn't really know. I will tell you that there's been some conversation over the last couple of years just about, man, should we kick this idea around? But there was more conversation in meeting last Wednesday, and this came out last Tuesday. So,
But I mean, what bad, like, I see no negative to be included in a conversation of what's going on in the county.
I think all we would, all you need to tell me is that we're not opposed to that, you're not voting on anything.
Sure.
And at that point.
Why wait a month? Like I just don't want to delay this anymore,
And
handcuff you at all.
And that conversation may not happen until after the next meeting.
Sure.
But if there is a sense that, hey, we're open to being part of the conversation, then the only thing we would need to decide is who. I need to be there, I think, and then at least one, if not two, other board members, no more than two, but 1 to 2 board members who would be interested in just being part of that conversation. That does not need to be decided tonight. If the board feels like, hey, it's not a bad idea to participate in the conversation, that's fine. What we need to do over the next, couple of weeks is decide who makes most sense to attend that meeting. But yeah, I don't know if we have to wait until February.
I've always thought that the sales tax is a better option to increasing property tax, because we've already had people come that don't have children in school in the district upset, from the audience participation. I think that was when we were in one of the grade schools. And
Yeah.
so I do have a question though. You were saying once you don't have, I just want to explain it, it explained a little better to me. Once you don't increase the property tax, then it's hard to get it back, or that was said. Could you explain that a little more, because I didn't really understand that.
Sure. So anytime you're talking to the community about increasing their property tax, taking on debt that's going to increase their property tax, that generally doesn't go over well. I'm a property owner.
Right.
I don't like my taxes to go up. But if we get to 2036, where that first part of the debt is paid off, that would enable the district to lower the tax rate because we don't have that debt to pay off anymore. But then going back to the community and saying, well, now that we've paid that off, it's been a year or two, now we have an idea of, or we have a need to borrow money for more revenue. Getting them to support the idea of the tax rate going back up is really hard. If you can keep it, and please hear me out, I'm not interested in keeping taxes up any longer than anybody else is.
Right.
However, there is a need, and if that's the way, if we can wait till 2036 and 2039, and when that debt rolls off, talk about additional debt that keeps that tax rate at the same place. From a communication standpoint, explaining to the community that we're not increasing their taxes, but we're still going to be able to generate revenue by selling bonds to pay for those projects. It's not easy, but it's easier than telling them your tax rate's gonna go down, but in 2 years, we're gonna ask you to raise it again. That's really hard.
I see. And then, you know, we have the convocation center, what is it called, the big sports arena that they have
Yeah.
over. Now, will we get, if we have the 1% sales tax, will concessions and other foods that are sold at places like that also help contribute? So in other words, our constituents or people living in our district won't necessarily be carrying all the weight of that 1% sales tax.
The majority would still be carried by residents in DeKalb County, or DeKalb, that's where most of the population is. But to kind of use your example, when there's an event at the Convocation Center and people come from Kane County, and I don't know my counties as well, Ogle County, once they come over here and they're spending that money here, that's a resident from another county who's coming here, spending money, and we get a little portion of that.
Okay.
So when there's events like that, and I do believe that concessions are covered, although I'd want to double check that.
Yeah, they're tax exempt, so I'm pretty sure that they're not.
That was my question. As long, if they're tax exempt, they're not generating any sales tax, so it doesn't matter. So at the Convocation Center, no. If they go to Fatty's or
Yeah.
someplace and grab lunch or whatever, it is covered.
And then we do have a lot of college students that come from all over the place that we frequent a lot of the restaurants and everything, I guess, so.
And the grocery stores and Walmart.
Well, that's an excellent point, though, that Beth brought up, though, is NIU, Converse Park NIU. Is all of NIU tax exempt, or could we capture some revenue from that?
I
Like sales?
guess-
I don't think so. I mean, we can explore that, but I'm pretty sure.
Getting pennies.
Like,
They
because
do
it's
eat
held
a
at
lot.
the university, my
Yeah.
guess is it's
Like when school's in session.
almost
very
all, if not all,
Chipotle.
tax exempt, but there may be portions.
Any business that those students patronize,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, off campus.
But the bookstore or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are the sorts of things, we would just need to fine tune that, we need to know that, but we also need to make that part of a communications effort. You know, this is what's exempt and this is what isn't.
Oh, yeah.
This is what's gonna generate revenue and this is what won't.
But NIU is just such a big part of the county, you know.
They are.
It'd be interesting if any other towns are.
We would increase our restaurant tax to up to 1%. So one quick point, I didn't talk about this earlier, it goes up a maximum of 1%. You can ask for it in quarter, is that right? 1/4% increment. I think if you're gonna do it, ask for 1%, but it would take our revenue tax up 1%, yeah.
Our restaurants right now, 10%
I
in
don't-
County.
I don't know that, I would want to double check that. And I think that would be part of, if there's a conversation, some of that research that needs to be. There was some information presented by Stiefel about, you know, tax rates in DeKalb County and Keene County. Yeah,
Ogle has it, you said? Oh, okay. Completely misunderstood that.
but Ogle is pursuing it. They've had this conversation for a while, so they are very kind of committed to pursuing the 1% sales tax in Ogle County. So they're a couple steps ahead of us. Any other questions or comments for me?
Just a comment that's kind of irrelevant, but when I look at the picture, I see that the building, the part of the building that was constructed in 1961, that's the year I was born, and then 1977, that's the year my daughter was born. So I just can't help looking at, it has nothing to do with anything.
Funny how it matches up, right?
Yeah.
You know, when we talk about renovations, I'll keep thinking about this building and what it looked like before it was renovated. And it's like a totally different building. When people came in here, it was like a new building to them. So, you know, so I think in some ways we've delivered on that promise before and you know, could do it again and could use this building as an example of that.
The other thing, though, that I've been thinking about that has me a little bit nervous, and that is, we're not the only district that's going through this problem. In fact, the majority of districts throughout the state have this problem of maintaining buildings that have already been built. And what I'm worried about is that we go through this and we get financing from the community, and then the state makes available grant money to start to maintain buildings that is already put money into, or communities have already put money into. And we then have to go sit on the sidelines because, because we already took care of the financial need, and so we miss out on that funding. So I really want to talk to our state representative and find out what's going on in that world in terms of what the state intends to do or not do with regard to maintaining these buildings. I mean, little districts way downstate are not going to have the money, no matter what kind of sales tax they put into place. They're just not going to have the money to maintain their buildings. So, in my way of thinking, the state's got to do something.
Well, I don't disagree. I just don't expect it coming anytime soon. So I think you're right, a conversation with our local representatives about what the conversation is like in Springfield and amongst the legislators, I think is a really good point. But I know that the school construction grant program that was in existence for a long time was only funded about every 10 years.
Yeah.
And only the districts at the top got a cut of money because there was very little in terms of what was needed.
But things are quite different now in terms of funding from the state. So, they've really kind of scrimped on what their obligation is. And at some point, they're gonna have to make up for it. And that's their pattern, that's their pattern is, go as long as we can without doing anything until it gets to be a big, big problem, and then we address it. And then it costs more.
There's been a lot of talk about resurrecting that school construction grant program. It will look
I
different.
think they have to. I mean, I don't see any way around it.
I agree, but that conversation's been going on for a while, and if that happens, that's a good problem to have. We've got some an option that we didn't have, that we don't have now.
But I hate to see us miss out on it because we've done this.
Jim, as a side point, I agree with your concern. I think that's a valid one at that with the grant. I think Warren Buffett addresses that as dollar cost average investment. And I think that like what we see with the path here with expansion, the district, when you talk about spending any money, we should embody that method where we're doing incremental changes over a period of time. And so if the state does release money, we don't miss out on that opportunity. So that is just, and I think that's just a general rule. Like when you do investment, you never put all your money in at one point. You spread it out over a period of time so you don't miss volatility spikes.
And simultaneously, you brought up another point that I thought was pretty good, is that the way we educate children now is going to change. It's going to always change. We don't know what the classroom's going to look like in 30 years or 10 years. It very well could change what spaces are needed, how we utilize those spaces, and what technology we actually need to buy or invest in as a district. So I guess that's just another factor to consider in all this. When we're looking at brick and mortar, how much and where.
Yeah.
How the district invests its money, we should, again, Eric probably can speak to this too, an investment, dollar cost average investment strategy is tried and true. So I don't know that at any point we were discussing not doing that, but I do think that hybrid models and volatility from the state would be qualified by that.
Well, here's what I'd like to kind of recommend in closing this part of my presentation is, as that conversation continues amongst the schools in DeKalb County, we'll keep the board informed. if there's a meeting that's scheduled, obviously make sure that the board is aware of that. If that happens before February 27th, I may be seeking, interest in terms of participation in that. If it doesn't happen before February 27th, I'll give you an update on February 27th. We can have a conversation then and see where we're at.
I mean, I think I could appoint individuals to represent us on whatever committee comes together.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to close this one. If you have additional questions or comments, this is a big enough one that I think that you're going to go home and wheels will turn and you'll think about things. Please reach out to me. Feel free to shoot me an email, give me a call, whatever the case may be, okay? The next one is future focused. And I chose transfer tax and impact fees. This is a topic that's come up. We've had some interest in local residents. So I picked Nicole's brain a little bit. We did some research on documents that we had. So I'm going to talk about these and then field any questions. So impact fees and transfer taxes were implemented in 1990 and 2006 respectively. Talked about the questions that have come up about these two sources of revenue. I included them as future focused items because they've come up from members of the public, so I thought it was a good opportunity. I had to do some research because I know a little bit about these, but they were implemented before my time, so it helped me to do that, but hopefully it's a worthwhile conversation for the board. There's been some calls to end these. My recommendation would be to continue to support them, but we're also I'm not asking you to make a decision on this tonight, just giving information. So first, a little information about both. And I think some of this is going to get directed at, Eric sent me an email earlier with some additional information. Impact fees were initiated in 1990 by City of Sycamore ordinance. They're collected for new and residential construction. All taxing bodies in Sycamore benefit from these funds. So the city collects them and then it's dished out or it's distributed to all the taxing bodies in Sycamore. Fees are calculated based on the number of bedrooms in a new home. Each taxing body receives funds monthly. Distribution has changed a little bit over time, but right now we're getting funds monthly. Funds are restricted to purchase of land, purchase of real estate, and facility renovations. These funds have to be spent in 10 years. So one of the things that Nicole does is track when those funds come in, how long we have them, and when they need to be spent by. And that was part of the cash land audit that was presented, part of the consent agenda. Currently have a balance of $1.394 million in that fund, so to speak, that account. Transfer taxes are a little bit different. Initiated in 2006 by the City of Sycamore by ordinance. It's collected from new residents within Sycamore city limits. Transfer taxes can be collected from the same individuals that they move out and then they move back in. So that was one of the concerns that was brought to our attention. A resident lived in Sycamore, moved out, wants to come back, but knows that they're going to have to pay that transfer tax if they come back because they're a new resident. School district is the only beneficiary of these funds, although there is a small administrative fee held by the city. It's calculated based on $5 for every $1,000 of value. I put each taxing body, it's the school district only. We receive those funds monthly. These are unrestricted. They're deposited into our general funds. They don't go to a facility or operations and maintenance or anything like that. These funds have to be spent within 10 years. Is that correct? Or I didn't think so. That's my error. Sorry about that. We get about $500,000 in transfer taxes annually and quarterly installments. Fluctuates a little bit, but on average it's about $500,000. They both offset the increases in expenditures due to potential increases in student enrollment. Transfer tax can address increases in staffing, equipment, so on and so forth. Represents about 1% of our revenue. It's a pretty small portion of our budget, but it's a portion of our budget that's meaningful. Impact fees specifically support facility needs, because the higher expenditures typically associated with those costs. Again, while there's been calls to abolish those or end those, at this point, I would encourage the board to keep those in place, but keep this as a topic of conversation moving forward. Questions or comments?
One thing that I'm having a hard time with is that if a resident lives, let's say they live just outside city limits, but they still pay property taxes to our district, and then they choose to build a new home within the city of Sycamore, they have to pay that impact fee. Could we wait or somehow amend it? That just, to me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Especially if the levy's just going to the district, it'd be one thing, okay, the city's collecting the additional money to pay for their library fee or whatever. But since that resident is already paying our district, they're just moving, I don't see the need to tax that, but maybe I'm alone in that thought, or.
I'm sure that conversation could be had. This is a city ordinance. It wasn't done, without the school district knowing anything about it. But it's a city ordinance, so we have to work with the city on that. It does open the door to residents or families that have students in the district, and I'm asking for other exemptions and exceptions as well. So the only, I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but one of the caveats I would put out there is that once you start a conversation about one exemption, there will undoubtedly be others. So the board would just need to kind of brace itself for that and be prepared to hear those and to weigh those as well. But I'm sure that conversation could be had. It would just be a matter of working with the city on that, because at the end of the day, this is a city ordinance. It's not something that the school district oversees.
And I suppose that.
Well, the basis for the tax was that there's an impact on the school district, that the school district doesn't recover when somebody first moves into town. Now, you may argue that, well, they already lived in town, but when they move, then they change their residence and somebody else moves into their property. And so that has an impact that we don't immediately recover. It takes a while for us to recover that. And so the tax is designed to allay that impact as much, in a very small way, because, taxes are quite a bit more than what this levy is. So that's the basic gist of it. I mean, that's what the gist of the mayor's committee that formulated it, which was comprised of a number of organizations and people throughout the community, went with. So.
And I agree philosophically with that approach. I think it's gotten pretty far away from that original intent. I know when I first got on the board, this was past 4 months before we bought our first house here. But I know at the time when I first got on the board, we were having that discussion about there's a lot of new construction going into Sycamore. There's a several-year lag between that house going in, it generating or actually being assessed at its value, and us collecting tax revenue above the coast on. But I think it's like almost a 2 or 3 year time lapse between they move into house and school actually collects the revenue from that house being assessed as real property. So we've got $5,000 to $10,000 a year we're not collecting. You multiply that by a couple hundred homes going in, and we're now having to build elementary schools, and we don't have the funding for it. My issue with where it's gotten today is that there's not a lot of new construction. It's being assessed on every house, whether it's created a new impact or not. If the necessity in my mind is because it's an impact, then that's what the impact fee should be for, not the real estate transfer tax, which is being assessed on every commercial building that gets bought and sold in town. So you're discouraging commercial investment, or at least taxing people who are just buying and selling commercial property, and then going and abating them their property taxes perhaps because you've decided that you want to motivate them to come to town, which seems weird to me. Other homes where you're just moving from, you know, right, like you said, right outside of town and into town, or if you're buying a rental unit, all of those are getting assessed that tax. And I can tell you just, you know, anecdotally, between me and my parents and my in-laws, we collectively have my 2 kids, we've paid that tax 10 times in town, as we moved businesses here from California, et cetera. And I didn't create that kind of impact for the district, so I get that it would be very hard for us to give up that revenue. I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that it's a gift to have that, and that we'd be having to scramble to find other ways to replace it. But philosophically, I have an issue with the motivation behind that tax still existing today, how it's applied, and how it runs counter to some of the other things that we're doing in town to try and encourage businesses to come here, et cetera. I would rather see it assessed actually as a change, a drastic change perhaps in the impact fee that says, yes, if you're building new homes, we need more than the, I don't know what we charge for impact fees right now. I want to say the city collects maybe $2,000 for a new home. Maybe that needs to be drastically reassessed for all this new property, but that's my personal feeling.
Yeah, I think that was the issue with the group that came into the one board meeting we had. She had moved out of the district and then back in. In fact, I think there was a group of people who were upset, if I remember correctly.
About 100.
Yeah, well, and you have to remember, those are all senior citizens. That's a senior complex that's
Yeah.
being developed.
The other issue with the way that tax is assessed is that it's not equitable amongst people moving in either, because if you move into town and buy a lot that you're gonna build a house on, well, maybe you bought that lot for 20 grand, you now pay transfer tax on 20 grand and build your $500,000 house. Versus you come into town and buy a $500,000 house, you're now paying transfer tax
No,
on
I
$500,000.
don't think that's correct.
Maybe it isn't, because it's just on the deed, it's based on the deed.
Based on the number of bedrooms.
That's the impact fee, not the transfer tax. Transfer tax is just based on the price of the deed. It's a 0.5%. So if you buy a
So,
$20,000
okay,
piece
I
of
thought you were
land.
talking about that.
No, yeah, no, transfer tax specifically. I have no problem with the impact fee. I think that makes perfect sense. But we also have to be prepared that according to at least that city ordinance, that they can terminate at any time without our permission as well. So it could be taken away just as easily without our say.
The same be done with the impact fees then?
I don't know anything about the impact fee.
They're both by city ordinance, so technically they both could. I would hope that they would, reach out if there's conversation amongst the city council and the administration about making a change. I would hope that they would reach out. I believe that they would, but at the end of the day, they could make that change independently of input from the school district.
Is there a timeline where we actually, because you said 10 years, that was an error, but is there actually a timeline where we have to utilize that fund?
For the impact fees, it's a 10-year.
Yeah.
It is,
Yeah. Impact these 10 years, there is no time limit on the transfer tax.
Thank you.
Because my concern with the transfer tax too, like Eric brought up, is the potential to dissuade any growth, or at least an incentive not to build here as opposed to build here. You already have to pay. So do people have to pay an impact fee as well as a transfer tax, and the transfer tax is contingent on where they're moving from?
Impact fee is on the new construction.
Right. But the transfer tax is,
They tend to move.
Another way of saying it is
Residential.
each property can only be taxed for an impact fee once, but it can be taxed on a transfer tax infinite.
that's what I'm saying. So if you have a senior citizen moving from Hoffman Estates to a Granger unit, some of them are taxed $13,000 a year, 60% of that goes to our district. They never put kids in the system, and they still have to pay an additional fee on that, or Granger would pay it.
You're saying they never put kids in the system, depending on where they move from. If they're already living in our district, then they're putting kids in the system because you got a new family that's moving
And one other
No, but
thing
if
I
you're
would.
moving from out of town, we can't, I guess, my pickup is if it's an impact fee, there should be a direct impact on the district by the person that's
Well,
paying the fee.
Which
not
is
I would also say
the
that
possible potential for
You're
an
gonna have
impact.
kids ever?
there are times where we have families move into the district into a rental that don't pay that. So I think part of the philosophy there, and that's just one example, there are situations where
The person that bought the rental paid it.
did. And you could make the argument that, they paid it when they built that building, let's say. But if you have multiple renters come in and you have renters move into a space where kids weren't living previously, I'm just saying that there are situations where you have families and students come into the district that don't pay these. So there is some degree of that offsetting that cost. And again, this is something for the board to think about. If there's conversation about that, we can provide some additional information on potential impact. If that revenue is lost, how do we overcome that, not just in 1 year, but over the period of, perpetuity, so to speak. So I think there's just a lot of things to consider there. And if the board really wants to have a conversation about modifying or approaching the city about modifying it, I would want to do a lot more research and have a second or another presentation to the board with some more detailed information.
I would personally, at least the transfer tax, there's been a lot of community members have spoken to me about it, they've spoken to us about it as a board. I do think it's something that's important to at least look into, not necessarily getting rid of it entirely, but to maybe just amending it and modifying it a little bit. It seems like people are taking issue with very specific, narrow situations relating to it and how it's imposed. That could be something worth exploring. I don't know if it's just opening a can of worms and letting loose the floodgates, but it might be something that would be good to have a conversation with the community about.
Well, I wonder if the community understands that we aren't the one that made the ordinance, because they came to the school board meeting upset, but until tonight, I didn't even realize that it was the city that really, maybe Jim did tell them that, I think, that night. But anyway, I don't even know if we can really do anything. If it's the city, do we have that influence to change what?
According to the ordinance, either party can terminate at any time.
Oh, okay.
I don't think that it's reasonable to look at like the origin of a tax, but instead the effect that the tax has on the district. I think that's a more pragmatic approach. And like, if you eliminate a transfer tax, the obligation the district has financially still exists, so it's going to still be captured. I would sooner see an argument about the impact fee being reduced, with the idea that, with the rationale being that it could drum up more new construction that could essentially offset the loss initially. So like, as a district going, okay, how do we spur growth in our tax base? Well, making it less prohibitive to be here. I insure a series of home builders and I talked to a lot of them. One of them has built 37 homes last year, none of which were in Sycamore. I was like, why are you building all these homes in Pingree Grove? He said, it costs $10,000 in permit fees to build a home in Sycamore. And if I'm buying 15, 20 lots, selling those lots, it's a lot easier to sell them in Pingree Grove than it is to sell them in Sycamore. I don't know that this is an us problem, but if we're building 51 new homes in Sycamore a year, and that number's been tried and true for the last 10 years, as a district, if we can find a way to get that number up to 70 with cooperation with the district, you're not going to do it messing with transfer tax, but you sure will, at least by entertaining a change to the impact fee. So, just an idea.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And the people that filled that house would have an impact on the district.
Again, the rationale to me is new, like it's minute. It's more or less the effect that you would have from the tax. You know what I mean? Like, you start getting down this, well, we have this tax because way back when we did, whereas like a pragmatic approach would be like, well, this is how we're using the money now, and this is how we could potentially ease the burden on taxpayers and get more people to come to this community and have more than the same 3,000 students going here for the last 10 years.
But then those additional students, require funding.
Right, which is where you
That's-
capture it
that's
on
where
the
it
property
kind of
tax.
seems a good offset.
After 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, again, like you do it with abatements on commercial property, this is like the residential abatement, so to speak.
We'll just be getting rid of something that they went in reverse.
No, it's like we grant abatements in terms of commercial properties. So what type of abatement exists for residential properties? And since Sycamore is composed of 88% residential properties, it would only seem reasonable that our district would posture itself to try to ease or try to grow that residential basis if we can't grow the commercial basis. And impact fees have a direct hindrance to the growth of residential bases. Just looking again at demographic data, and like, they're not new. We had 17,000 people here in 2010 in Sycamore, with 18,300 in 2024. Other communities are adding 20, 30% to their population in some cases. Sycamore, thank goodness, is not seeing decline, but I wouldn't call it growth. And that's, you know, that's not what a community wants to hear if they're talking about, you know, expanding. That's like, it's like the kiss of death for a community as your population eventually declines. So, again, lowering impact fees, bring in more people, hopefully more building. Kind of a roundabout way.
I have a whole lot more to say, but I'm not gonna say it.
This is future focused. I just was throwing it out there for conversation, something to mull over, and encourage you to do that if there is a further conversation that you'd like to have about it, or I'd be glad to reach out to the city. You know, one of my questions, I think new growth can be good for the community. My understanding is that Sycamore is purposefully, and I think for the right reasons, kind of control that growth. If we do things to encourage that, you know, just kind of be mindful of the effect. If instead of 50, if it's 70, what's the impact? Not all those homes will have students. So just some things to think about, but certainly could be more conversation if we'd like to just, you know, talk to Jim and let him know, or let me know.
Well, it seems incongruous to me that we're talking about raising sales taxes and what we're gonna give up, transfer taxes. I mean, that doesn't seem to make sense to me. But I guess I'm missing something.
I agree. I also don't think we should give up the transfer tax.
I don't think we're gonna change City Hall that easy.
Well, I mean, opting out of receiving the transfer tax.
I guess I don't know if it's honestly worth, I mean, it seems like it's such a small, you know, amount of money we get from the transfer tax, but it's something to us, right? But I guess I'm just trying to figure out how big of a burden this really is, to see if it's worth continuing to investigate, or, you know.
I think the burden on an individual or a family is smaller than the impact to the school district if that goes away. You know, $500,000 a year. So one of the things sometimes I'll do to kind of put that in perspective is a certified teacher on average, $60,000, $65,000. So $500,000 to the district is not quite 10, but is that 8.5 certified staff? So if that money goes away, that's the impact on the school district. It's a smaller amount to families. It's significant to families. It's significant to homeowners. Don't get me wrong, but that's just something that we would need to have a conversation about, you know, moving forward, if we wanted to change anything.
Well, I think even if we opted out of it and tried to be nice about it to people, the county's still gonna keep the money. I don't see them getting rid of that tax, even if we say, oh, we don't want the money. I would not.
I'm not suggesting that we get rid of it. I'm not prepared to make that recommendation or ask. I'm just saying that
No.
when members of the community come to me complaining about this tax, I also can't defend that it's existing to fulfill the purpose that was originally intended.
Right. So it's difficult.
It's just another tax that we're collecting on people moving around
Right,
town,
it's
whether
just-
there's an
It's a
impact on the
difficult
individual.
situation.
You're gonna just have to pay for it, but that's the thing, if it goes away, it's not like you're gonna get rid of a certain
understand.
staff, so like, you know, if you're moving to the town, you have to know that you're gonna pay it you have to pay it one way or another, whereas the impact fee, at least, like, you know, that's something that is entirely variable, so. That's important to me, targetable tax.
To me, it all comes down to the fact that the state is not funding education properly. And they should be beating on the doors of their representatives, demanding that that the state properly finance education. Then we don't have to nickel and dime and charge these fees that people hate. I don't blame them.
Right, right.
But we gotta make money somehow. I mean, you know, somebody alluded to the fact that, I think it was you, Alex, that, you know, the city has a whole milieu of opportunities to raise funds, and we have a very limited space to do that. And it's ludicrous, and yet, you know, everybody comes here because they see that big figure on the tax bill that says this is the school district that's
That's our
charging
only
you this
shot.
tax.
Yeah.
But it's just passed on from the, you know, the operating funds for the state. It's a deliberate policy on the part of the state of Illinois to fund to fund education off of personal property. I mean, it's clear that that's true. And you know, until people wake up and start to realize that and start directing their opposition in the right place, we just stand as a screen for representatives. You know, they send everybody here saying, well, look at, you know, it's the school district that, you know, raises your taxes. Not us. Well, yeah, it is. It's the state. You know. It's the state failing to fund education, which clearly they have a mandate to do under the Constitution. So it just drives me up the wall, because it, you know, having been on the school board as long as I have, I see it pretty clearly, and yet they continue to get away with it year after year after year. So anyway, I said too much already, probably.
No, it's okay, it's the truth. It's pretty corrupt.
Well, that's what I love to do with Future Focused. I just throw stuff out and get you guys stirred up, so.
And I don't see them getting rid of any taxes, just keep the money somewhere else, if the district doesn't get it.
Well, you know how the lottery funds education. Sure, okay, we take the lottery money, we put it in the general fund, and then we take an equivalent amount out of the general fund and use it for education. Yeah, that worked out well. Any other issues or questions or comments about future focused segment? All right, then we'll move on to urban discussion and future agenda items. Alex, I know you have something.
Yes.
You have some things. So.
Yeah, I'll just pass this out. It's kind of a lengthy future agenda item, therefore, and let's make sure one gets to the superintendent too, so he can sort of follow
Thank you,
along.
Alex.
Yeah, so I'll just go ahead and read this so it's clear. So everyone's aware, the Board of Education belongs to a policy service through the Illinois Association of School Boards, which is a association this district pays dues to, and they have a service called the Policy Reference Education Subscription Service, and it provides guidance to local school boards on suggested policy changes. Press ensures that policies in the manual are aligned with good governance principles and to keep the footnotes and legal references current. Press issues are released as needed, but generally 3 to 4 times per year. This was taken from Canelet. I can't write that out, but I'll give credit where it's due. And so this is me now. I've recently discovered that certain policies, specific examples include 450 and 480 pertaining to finance and audit, are missing some of the IASB suggested language. And in this packet, the pages labeled Grados Revised, I hand wrote those on there, include the missing language. And changes to these policies were first initiated in 2008 by IASB, but it's not clear why these changes never were reflected into the district's policy manual. I talked to an IASB rep and the superintendent, and there aren't clear records on that. However, in February of 2022, the board voted to adopt all the red language. However, it still hasn't made its way into the manual. So this has resulted in discrepancy where despite the decision the board previously made, the policies have failed to be included in our Press Plus policy manual system. All of the other districts in our conference, so Haneland, Geneva, DeKalb, Genoa, Kingston, Hiawatha, have all this language. So I just want to try to clear this issue up and ensure that we have all this language in our policy manual, not just for 450 and 480, but to see if there's any other policy discrepancies from our manual and to the recommended press language. So first, I'd like to affirm the adoption, which is what Steve and I sort of discussed would be the best route to take, of all language included in 450 and 480. And then I'd like to review all, at some point, review all the policies in the manual to see if there's any other discrepancies between our policy manual and the press policies that we have been voted on. And then I'd like to figure out a way to ensure that we don't have this issue going forward, so that there's some sort of step to ensure that when a policy is voted on, it finds its way to the manual and those two things are synced up 100%.
So all the red is what's missing, correct?
Correct. And this is just two policies I happen to find. There could be more. So I guess I'd like you to fill in, Steve, if there's anything I missed or got incorrect.
So our understanding, so first of all, I'm going to back up and say that Alex has really dug into this. We've kind of gone back and forth a little bit. He's made recommendations to the policy committee. We had a conversation about that when the policy committee met in December. Our understanding, really, I have to credit Kelly on this because she did a lot of the legwork on our end, contacting IASB. So when policies are updated, we send those to IASB Press. They update them. So when you look at our policies online, we don't do that. We send them the updates and then they do that for us. These two policies, for whatever reason, especially 480, I think, got pretty complicated, and so our understanding back in 2009 is that the board did see these and for whatever reason chose not to include whatever language is missing. I can't speak to that, it's well before my time. So we've done that digging, and that's our understanding based on the conversation with IASB. One of the other complications with this is that Press offers two services, kind of a Press Basic, where everybody just gets the recommended policy update and that's it. There are some options, but it's pretty standard, it's pretty boilerplate. We subscribe to Press Plus, which is advantageous because Press and IASB will tailor policies if we choose to do that. So in reviewing policy changes, if we want to add something that we think is specific to Sycamore, we can do that. If we want to take something out, we can do that. We have a little bit more flexibility in terms of customizing the policies. When policy updates come out, which are one of my favorite things to receive in an email, and Kelly likes it even more, we get the Press and we get the Press Plus. And they're not always the same, because policies that we've reviewed and updated in the past, if we've customized those, now there's a kind of a deviation from the Press policy. So we've talked about how we can kind of tighten that down with the policy committee, make sure the policy committee knows here's the Press version, here's the Press policy or Press Plus version. At the end of the day, there may have been some miscommunication from the district to IASB, what shows up. I guess there are a couple of things and Alex, make sure that I get this right. Ultimately, Alex is proposing changes to 450 and 480, at least initially. But I think there's more, but make sure I get this right. So recommending changes to these two policies.
I guess I wouldn't say it's a change, it's more of affirming the language that was voted on February 8th, 2022, that didn't make its way into the manual. So it's affirming the previous board's decision.
And that's part of where the miscommunication, maybe miscommunication, misinterpretation. Again, when you've got the press and the press plus.
Yeah. And they voted on press,
And
or not press plus, is what I understand.
Yes.
Is what from my conversation with the IASB attorney, that was the issue.
And I don't think that was intentional. I think that was part of the miscommunication. So part of what I think Alex is asking for is to reaffirm what the board voted on at that time. But that was in 2022 with a different board. Kind of complicates things a little bit. Or does this just go to this board? It goes to the policy committee for review again, comes to the rest of the board for consideration, just to affirm that's what this board would like to have in place. I think those are two routes to accomplish the same thing in the long run. So there's one thing is just policies 450 and 480. I guess I want to be clear about this. One route is for both of these to go back to policy committee, come back to the entire board for consideration and for a vote. I think that committee structure exists for a reason, and it's nice to have the time to be able to go through those policy updates, have some conversations about them, and then have recommendations come to the board. They go through 2 readings, so the entire board gets to see them once and then gets to see them twice. So that kind of deals with 450 and 480. One of the other things that Alex and I talked about was we have caught these 2 policies, and there are potentially some deviations from what this board's or the previous board thought that they were approving and what we have. Is there a need to do an entire review of the policy manual, which is based on recommendations from IASB, either a year or a 2-year long process? They have a map. I don't think I brought that with me tonight. But they have a map where they kind of recommend, if you're going to do that, you want to do it over 1 year, do the policy, the sections in this order. If you want to do it over 2 years, it kind of take a little bit more time. There's a procedure to do that over 2 years. That's an intensive process. I've not been through it before, but I've talked to boards and IASB about doing that. I would, if the board wants to do that, I think that should be an ad hoc committee. It's probably going to meet, I would guess, on a maybe almost a monthly basis, maybe take some time off during the summer, but on a monthly basis to go through every policy. And to see not only where there may be a deviation, but then to review every policy and make sure that that's what we want. So that's number 2. And then Kelly and I, part of our job is to make sure that moving forward, and we've had this conversation, moving forward, whatever we have, whatever new comes out, making sure that the policy committee knows here's the press plus, so that as we're reviewing those, they're clear on what's being recommended to the board, and we can make sure you guys know this is what's being recommended from the policy committee. Because one of Alex's points is, I think that maybe a previous board voted on having the language that he's recommending in here. We want to make sure that moving forward, the policy committee knows what they're recommending, and the rest of you, the other 5, know exactly what the policy committee is recommending. Did I get it all?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, I think. So,
Good.
yeah, no, it's good. And I would be happy to do this for the other policies. I know it's a lengthy process, but if you guys think that that's something you'd like to do, I don't mind. Or having another board member join me.
2 things. One, Eric, that nobody's still in her hair. So I think getting
Fox Elder.
Need to have
Fox
hair
Elder, he's getting in there.
to host them.
No, to the second point, I do think that as a board, we should decide in some capacity now tonight, as Steve had mentioned and Alex had mentioned, to either affirm this as a oversight from 2022 to the policy, or to proceed with a review by the policy committee and then have it represented, which to me seems like affirming it will still require it to be represented because it's not an action item. So the way I see it, the path that is inevitable is that we've reviewed this now, and then come second reading as a board, we will need to affirm it and/or adopt it. Is a synonymous language just because,
Yeah, we could put it on the next agenda.
I
yeah,
think procedurally, I'm not in favor of just the affirmation. I'd rather
Yeah.
know what all has changed, because even going back to the February 22, like the stuff that's missing here wasn't new stuff in 22. It's not highlighted, it's not
Correct.
called out, so it's not like the decision we made in 22 was saying, yes, we want to add those pieces either. So I don't think that reaffirming that decision serves the intended purpose of saying, gosh, we've got something wrong here, let's adopt the right one and know why, what has changed and why. So I'd rather
So
probably
do
start.
the two readings like we normally do.
I'm just saying I don't want to go back and say, oh, we voted on it in 22, so just make the change and we'll move forward.
Oh, not, yeah, we can't do that tonight anyway.
Right, I know we can't do anything tonight, but just of those two paths, I would rather know what all has changed, get it consolidated, do it all at once, or do it section by section,
Yeah, so
and
we
meeting or
could-
something, but.
Right, so we could, yeah, we could do like a first reading next time.
Yeah.
I guess it's just, to me, it's frustrating that Press Plus hasn't caught this. So is it even worth paying for that service if there's, you know,
You know,
that's my concern too.
Kelly can attest to this. We sat and discussed this at length. I think it is beneficial to have Press Plus. I still think it's beneficial to have that. And moving forward, I think we've got a good plan to make sure that the policy committee knows, here's the Press Plus, here's our existing. May make those meetings a little bit longer, but just to make sure that we have clarity, I still think it's worth it to have Press Plus. I do.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can do, and I've kind of requested this for a while now, there are a few sections in most packets where they give you a choice.
Mhm.
Okay, the vast majority, there's no choice, but usually, there's one or two things that you have a choice on. And we should highlight those especially for the board, so that they know, what the choices are, and can read those sections a little more carefully.
Yeah.
Because most of the other ones are just maintenance stuff.
I think that's similar to what we did tonight, where I brought up the library book banning policy, and
Yeah.
that was highlighted in board docs, is there's a stipulation that the board does have some flexibility with that language.
Yeah.
Maybe that wasn't practiced, you know, or I don't even know, I guess we didn't have Press Plus when this happened, but going
No,
forward.
but I'll tell you what, we did, I don't know if that was 2009 or before, we did, review the policy one year,
Mhm.
you know, line by line, letter by letter.
Yeah.
And, it took over a year, and, it was, it just wasn't very productive. Mostly what happened was grammatical changes, like, well, we need a comma here, or this needs to be capitalized. And I mean, I suppose that has some value, but it, you know, it's the substance that we're really
Mhm.
interested in. So I think that we could, why don't we try highlighting those provisions where there are choices? And see how that goes as opposed to, going through the whole thing. And, you know, I mean, you certainly can go through the whole thing if you want to. If you find other areas that are problematic, then I think that's an indication that we should do the whole thing.
I guess it was two different policies, but it was in the same section.
Yeah.
So
right.
I guess maybe I could start doing a sample from section 6, a sample from section 1, and seeing if there's discrepancies there too.
Yeah.
If that would, and.
Yeah, and you know, it's an issue with Press Plus, I mean.
Yeah.
If that's the case, because, you know, they're supposed to be on top of all that. They have, you know, like 3 lawyers that are working on that.
If they can send us a master document with all the sections optional, not, we should just be
Well, that's what I was comparing it to. Michael showed me there's a way for us to log into that and see that master file. And that's what I was comparing us to.
Yeah.
And I noticed that there was I found 2 discrepancies, but I just haven't had the time to go through every policy yet to see if there's any additional discrepancies.
That's what I'm wondering is it seems like ISB would have an easy tool to be able to say, yeah, you're paying them for the subscription. So it's like, hey, these are all the disparities between what this is.
Yeah, something to make sure that
Save us a
everything's lined
year.
up.
Yeah, could they do that, I guess I'm not saying I wanna go through and look at every piece of optional language the board's ever decided, but just to make sure this language that's not optional is included in our manual, and is that a service that IASB would maybe even offer as a courtesy, since we have this problem with them?
We can
to see if
ask.
there's anything else.
My experience with ISB is the answer is no. We're willing to pay for it, probably, but we can certainly ask. Again, our understanding is that for whatever reason, the board saw these and decided not to adopt them. So there was a sense that there was a choice in 2008, 2009 when these came up. But because I think there was maybe not clarity on when the board reviewed these policies after that, I don't know that it was clear enough that here's the press version that's the boilerplate that has all that language, and here's the press plus, which the district chose to adopt it in 2008, 2009.
We had press for a while. And
Yeah.
then we went to press plus.
So this is right in that transitionary period,
Yeah.
is when that's what it sounds like.
So, even if we do a full review, one of the things that I would just throw out as a caveat is that you will find sections where our policy deviates from the kind of press master document. The next question is gonna be, should it be that way? Do we have documentation that we do have notes of policy, from policy committee work going back a while, not back to 2009. But there may be points where we can say, yeah, it was, and we don't keep copious notes about why we chose not to accept optional language. So we may not know that, but we can certainly dig into that when there's a deviation. And, if we catch another situation where there was maybe a miscommunication with IASB, let's rectify that. But there may be times where there's a difference, we don't have the notes to establish why.
Yeah.
And then maybe that goes back to policy committee. Hey, there is a deviation, there was a decision made years ago, we don't really know why. We're just gonna look at it again as a matter of practice to review, kind of like the 5-year reviews that IASB the press has recommended now.
Exactly, yeah. And in the press master document, it has section by section, there's these little numbers, I don't know what they're called, attached at the end of certain sentences. And if you click on it, it will give you the option to view alternative language, and then it will tell you if that section of policy is optional or not optional. And these were not optional, so. I mean, I don't mind doing that, it's time consuming, but I think there might be some benefit there. So.
I do like the idea of maybe doing spot checking a couple of
Yeah.
sections and see if we catch anything else, and if we don't, then the board can consider whether or not we wanna take it further. If we don't, maybe these are 2 kind of anomalies, happen to be the 2 that you looked at, but if we don't catch any others, then the board can reconsider that too, and decide, well, we would still find worth in it, or no, we're good. Because one thing that policy committee knows, and I'm not sure that the rest of the board knows, is a couple of years ago, ISB, for a long time, if you adopted a policy back in 2000 and it was never updated, you just never saw it again. Several years ago, they started recommending that boards look at each policy at least every 5 years. So even if there wasn't a change to the policy, you were going to see it every 5 years. So if we don't catch any other issues, one kind of safety net is that the board's going to see, in the next 5 years, the board's going to see every policy at least once, whether there's a significant change or not. So there is going to be an opportunity to see every policy. It's a longer period of time, but an intensive review is going to take it, a year to 2 years anyway.
I don't think that's necessary. I think just identifying discrepancies and reviewing those is all that we want to do. And it seems like that's something the committee in an afternoon.
Where you will see the most deviation is whenever it refers to bargaining contract with the union. That's the sections that have the most deviation right there. Then the others are, a choice here or a choice there would be made. But the major deviations are in the personnel, in the union contract, so.
All right. And I can, hopefully I'm able to see on press that, I mean, I understand that language isn't just,
I don't think it's
missing.
reserved.
Like,
Yeah, no, I don't.
you know, it's just might be optional.
If it is, let us know and we'll get you a password.
All right, thanks.
Because there's no reason why you as a board member shouldn't be able to see that.
No, I can see all the policies, yeah, those are public. And same with Press Plus, I can see those to compare.
We cover everything?
So I guess I just, do we need consensus to bring this back up again? Or,
I think,
okay.
based on what I heard,
We'll put it on the,
Consent.
we'll put it on the next agenda,
Okay.
and then we'll vote on it. So we'll have a second reading on the policies that were up tonight for the first reading, and then we'll add a reaffirmation over that.
And then I'll let you know if I find anything else in between these meetings.
Yeah.
And then that might change our
And then,
course.
and then I think we need to have a conversation with Press Plus. if that's the case.
I tried that conversation and, it kind of was, it seemed like, not to be accusatory, it was one of those press, oh, it's your district's problem. The district, oh, it seems like press. So I don't know what the issue is, but at least it's caught and it seems like we have a solution going forward, so I'm happy. But we're paying for the Press Plus service.
Yeah.
I think they should,
You call that
Ensure.
passing the buck.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what you
But,
call it.
well, the buck was passed.
One of the reasons why we went with Press was to save money, so.
Yeah.
Because beforehand, we had to have the attorney approve every change to the policy, and that got very expensive, so.
Sure.
But for the money we pay Press, they ought to get it right.
So will we get a link right to the student bill that or policy that, or will we
Okay.
just to see everything?
So in your packet, I should have gone over that, I'm sorry.
No problem.
The files labeled Grados Revised,
Okay.
those have the additional language in red. The files that say press are printed straight from the press master file, essentially. And then the files labeled Sycamore are the ones that Sycamore currently has in our policy manual. So the red, so this is just to show discrepancies of the
Okay.
language that's missing. This one here shows, well, that's just the other policy. This is the one straight from press with all the additional language. And then this back here is what the district currently has on the file.
When this
Okay.
goes to review, Alex, is this language optional or non-optional?
Okay,
You
that,
mentioned that earlier.
the only piece of language that's optional is dark red and underlined, and that is on page 3 of 480 Grados Revised. And that language is just a list of internal controls, just a list of them. Now that, I guess, would be for the policy committee to decide if they want to adopt that additional language or not. But that's why that's dark red and underlined, that little section's optional, but nothing else is.
So when it's non-optional, how am I to interpret that? What does that mean? Is that-
It's up to the board to decide if they want it or not.
But if it's not optional, how is the board deciding?
No, that is optional.
That part is, right, so when we review this a second time, we're reviewing, am I understanding correct, we're reviewing non-optional language, so there is no choice for us to make, other than the dark
Other than
red.
agreeing to adopt the
Okay,
language.
just so I'm on the same page.
I guess, but that is a good point, though. Do we want to add in this additional language or not? But I guess who typically would decide? I guess that would be a policy committee recommendation, so you guys could determine if you
Yeah,
want it.
this would keep us, in check with Press Plus.
So this is just-
But I guess, do we want to add the list of internal controls?
Well, that's the part that
We'll
the
take-
policy
yeah.
committee will
Yeah.
talk about.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for me. It's a long one, so glad I printed it though, because could you imagine me trying to verbally?
No.
You know, it was nice of you to print all these papers.
Yeah, no, this is the way to do it, thank you. It's a lot of work.
Thank
That's why
you.
they pay you the big bucks.
Oh,
Trust
yeah.
me, it's a lot of work.
My salary will be doubled for it though, so.
Yeah, that's right. You know what, triple it.
Yeah.
Any other open discussion issues or future agenda items? Is there a motion to go into executive session?
So moved, Joe?
Do we need that?
But we don't need to.
Huh?
So that's one of the procedures we don't need to consent, or personnel report was part of the consent agenda. So we don't have to go into executive session.
Oh, okay.
And I-
Never had that before. We can do that just as long as there's no supervisory personnel or.
Personnel report can go into consent agenda as is. I double checked this with, I was pretty sure, but I checked it with Phil Berner anyway.
Oh, okay.
But that can go into the consent agenda. One thing that all of the board needs to know, this is one of the reasons that you get it in advance, is if there's a question about a specific position, you can ask that in advance. There was a question
Take it
about
off.
that.
Yeah.
And if there's a position that you want to vote on separately, that can be both and an impromptu, so to speak, executive session. The board could go into a kind of an impromptu to discuss that. So let me give you a really good example. If I was a board member and the board was going to hire my wife or my son or my daughter, I might purposely ask that to be pulled off so I can vote yes or whatever on the rest of the personnel report, but abstain from that.
Mhm.
Pulling it from the personnel report doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to vote against it. Now, it may be a position where you have a question. You could vote against it if you so desired. I would encourage you, I would ask that you, if you have a concern about a position, please let me know as soon as you can. But that's a really good example of pulling it out of the personnel report so that it can be voted on separately. The board is well within its right to do that. Any individual board member is within its right to ask for it.
After all those years, it seems weird. I believe you.
I figured it would. I know it's been this way for a long time,
Yeah.
but Phil and I had a good conversation about it.
Well, then I assume legal updates, we'd still just go back there, or contract negotiations or
Board
whatnot.
could go into closed
Yeah.
session for any of those reasons that are approved. Could be a personnel item, could be student discipline, could be legal, could be a variety of things. There are 16 that are approved. If we feel like that's necessary, we're gonna let you know, and it's gonna be on the agenda to go into executive session. So yeah, we still can, but we don't have to every meeting.
Okay, well, there's only one thing left. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So
So
moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, we stand adjourned.